tērā, nau mai, whakatō mai, hui mai. I rota I te rangi Māori e Maongaro. Nō reira, tēnā rā katoa. Welcome everybody. My name is Tui Riwhiu and I'm the Executive Director of the Directors and Editors Guild. And we have a very special evening tonight which we're presenting together with the Screen Production and Development Association. Thanks to the Film Commission for their financial support in allowing this to happen. So the theme for this evening's discussion is keeping it together, the director and producer relationship, and we're extremely fortunate, I have to say, in having two of the sort of leading lights of the New Zealand film industry who have taken time out to join us tonight. Sorry about the train, they do go by every once in a while. I'm sure both of them need no introduction, but I will give a quick brief intro to them anyway. So we have Director Lee Tamahori who is with us, and Lee is here at the moment, has just finished shooting The Patriarch, which Robin Scholes has produced. And it's comes at a 20-year span since Lee did Once Were Warriors, and which really set him on the path to international success. And he spent those 20 years away and did a number of films, some of which I'm sure, if not all of them, you're aware of. Starting obviously with Mulholland Falls, The Edge, Along Came a Spider, the Bond film, which was once a hugely successful film, Die Another Day. I don't know how to say this, Lee. XXX, State of the Union.
Yeah, it's like a porn movie, isn't it? Triple X. Yeah.
Next, The Devil's Double, which was more recent. Emperor, which I believe is still in post-production.
Still ongoing. More about that later.
And obviously, The Patriarch. So Lee has an extensive career overseas, but has returned after all of this time to join Robin again on another project that's undoubtedly dear to their hearts, and we'll hear a bit more about it. Robin, as everybody knows, has an international reputation as well, but she has stayed here at home instead of heading offshore, and has seen many directors on their way, starting out after Once Were Warriors. Robin did Broken English with Gregor Nicholas, Rain with Christine Jeffs, Crooked Earth with Sam Pillsbury, Colin McCann, I Am, which was a documentary with Paul Swedell, The Tattooist with Peter Berger, The Hopes and Dreams of Gazza Snell with Brendan Donovan, Mr. Pip, more recently with Andrew Adamson, and now, of course, here we are again. So I think it's wonderful that they're both here tonight. I'd actually like to just ask you to put your hands together for them taking the So I wanted to really start out because it all began, I guess, prior to Once Were Warriors. And so, Lee, I wanted to ask you firstly, what really motivated you to want to become a feature film director?
Jesus. Actually, I always thought I would like to be one, but in that environment when I thought I would like to be one, it was virtually impossible to be one. This is the 1970s, of course, and there was no film industry short of the National Film Unit and various commercial enterprises that were running around. But my desires were like everybody's. I just go to film festivals, watch great movies, and think, "Wow, I'd love to do that." That's basically it. That was the kind of you'd love film, and you would like to do whatever it is. You'd like to be Roman Polanski. You'd like to be this. You'd like to be Francis Coppola or whoever else I admired at the time. I guess what happened was I was fortunate enough to be around in the industry when nobody knew anything. Johnny Blick was around. He was doing something, and no. Johnny, didn't you shoot Solo for Tony?
Yes.
Yeah. So the first films that were made in the 70s were Solo and Sleeping Dogs, and Johnny was shooting then. He was a DP and shot Solo for Tony Williams. And suddenly there was a film industry. Suddenly there emerged a film industry because we're on the coattails of the Australian Film Commission, the Australian example of the Film Commission. The New Zealand Film Commission was set up in the mid to late 70s, but Solo was not part of it, and nor was Sleeping Dogs. They fell outside that remit. They were made before that. But so all of a sudden, the atmosphere was alive in New Zealand with the idea that you could make films. And so I jumped in with my then partner of some 25 years, Brian Kassler, and we knew nothing. We were just doing nothing. But there were great days because you could actually know nothing at all and get a job. You could actually call yourself whatever you liked and be that person. You can't sort of do that anymore. Well, maybe you can, but it depends on your level of bullshit, I guess. But you get exposed more easily now. But back then, we didn't really know anything. And the only jobs you could get were on commercials or whatever. But so I piled in and said, I was pretty much unemployed. And I thought, well, look, and I went to see Don Reynolds, who was a sound recordist, and I said, I hear you're looking for a boom operator. I didn't even know what that was. And he said, yeah, and he was with Sam Neill, who was then working at the National Film Unit as a director, not an actor. He'd just done Sleeping Dogs, and Sam was and I said, yeah, I hear you're looking for a boom operator. And he says, yeah. So he says, well, do you know what that is? I said, no, I thought it was somebody that blew things up, like a special effects guy. And he said, well, look, I do need a boom operator, but I'll tell you what, I'll teach you how to do it, but I won't pay you. And I said, well, that's fine, I'm not being paid anyway. And he said, if you're any good, I'll pay you, and if you're no good, I won't pay you anything. And I said, well, that sounds fine to me. So that was kind of the way it started off. And in a short answer is I never intended to be a film director. I never, in a strange student type of atmosphere, you thought you might want to be one. But I was just happy to be a technician on a film and be making films, and then I thought this was fantastic, and I had no idea where it was going to take me. So the short answer to all of that is I did not want to be a film director, but I really did want to work in movies, doing anything pretty much, and like I think a lot of people, and I still to this day look around for those people who are kind of hungry enough to want to do anything on any part of a picture, because from that they can leapfrog around this business and be anything you like. People like Stu Dryber and Ginny Lone were gaffers, and they jumped to being DPs, and that's an unusual path. Like I was a boom operator and became an assistant director. These are very unusual paths. They don't happen in America and in the British environment and the more established environments, but they can happen here, and you can do things much more easily because you only have to be you have to prove that you're as good as what you say you are. That's basically it here. I know it's become more professional and more technical now, but that's the way it started out. But I have to admit that, look, before I go on raving on too long, I was working in a hothouse environment of this film and that film, and Jeff Murphy, who was making films and was doing this and that, doing special effects, directing, said to me one day while we were driving from Ratahi to Wellington, he said, I reckon you should be an assistant director, and you should be this assistant director on this big Maori film I'm making. And I said, you're out of your mind. And it was raining, and I said, why? I'm a boom operator. And he says, yeah, but you know more about making films than half the guys in this country. And he said, if you can suggest anyone who'd be a better assistant director for me, you tell me what their name is, and I'll hire them. And that's how Jeff and I had quite a long relationship. But if it hadn't been for that, Jeff gave me the impetus to want to move out of one area into another, which I did, and then the rest is kind of history. I moved on and did this and did that and did that, and I was Jeff's AD on Utu, which was a baptism by fire. And then after that, when I was an AD on a lot of films, and to this day, I still say this to a lot of people, I worked for a lot of directors, some good and some bad, and some middle of the road. But it's the ones who don't know what they're doing that teach you the most, not the ones who do know what they're doing. The ones who do know what they're doing, you can learn from. But the ones that will spur you into action are the ones, because you will look at them and go, I can do better than that person, because they don't have a clue what's going on, and at least I have more of a clue of that. So it runs into ego and all of those things, but it is what spurs you into action. So one day I decided to stop being an assistant director and become a director, and no one would give me a job. Nobody. I remember going around, and suddenly a commercial, people like Johnny was, you were running a commercial company at the time, Jeff Dixon had his, And it was the commercial companies that heard that I was looking for work as a director, and that's when I went to start shooting as commercials as a director.
Right.
Best film school in the world, bar none, and I still maintain that to this day. Commercials may be crap in some ways, but they're at the cutting edge of technology. They take no prisoners. If you're no good, you don't work. It's not like coming out of a film school where you feel a sense of entitlement because you won a prize, that you feel that you deserve the job at making it, and you've won a prize in a short film that you should make a major feature. I'm a believer in craft and excellence, and learn your way through it. And commercials is the best place in the world to do that. So I started making commercials, and the roundabout story about how Robin and I got together was, I started making commercials, formed my own production company with Brian Kessler. We started making commercials, getting a lot of cash, driving Range Rovers, having a good time. But I was also looking at the film industry as that happened, and I remember I became one of the arch critics of the sort of films we were making back then in the 80s and early 90s, and because I was aware that we were just marking time and doing these bucolic movies, and that we weren't really getting into the hard-edged school of filmmaking that we should have as a nation, that we should have been doing something. So I was bleating on all over the place at places like this and all sorts of, about how we really should be making tougher films than we should be making. And strange enough, Stu and daughter, his wife at the time, Stu Dryborough, came along with Once Were Warriors and said, "Look, this is fucking dynamite book, you should make this into a movie." I said, I read it and went, "You're out of your mind, this is a nightmare. No one would go and see this thing." And that was a year or so before Robin came along and said, "Look, I've got the rights to this book." And I said, "Look, I'll tell you what I told Stu, it's a nightmare, it can't be made." And eventually, because of my bleating about the shape of the New Zealand film industry, I kind of talked myself into it. So, well, look, if you're you better stand up and be counted. And if you really believe the industry or the films we're making are that parlous or are not up to it, step up and go and do it. And the way into that was Once Were Warriors, and that's
History.
Sorry about the long rave, but that's the
right.
history of it.
So, Robin, you had you're an academic background. You made a lot of television, and what sort of pushed you towards film? What made you want to do film?
Well, I was I loved film. So I was an only child. My mother worked. Her idea of babysitting me was to send me to the cinema. So I grew up, through all the school holidays, just looking at films. So and as an academic, I studied film. But the real reason I got into making Once Were Warriors was and Karen Soach will remember this really well because she was part of the old Communicado crew, is that I was part of a group called Communicado, 4 boys and me, and we had a board meeting one day, and Neil Roberts, who was a kind of a larger-than-life character, at the end of the board meeting we had decided that we would add more diversity to our business, which is kind of what our motto at the time was make money and have fun. It was probably have fun and make money. And so at the end of this, he went, "Right, diversity, let's make films and commercials. Robin, you can make the films, I'll do the commercials." Simultaneously, I walked out of of that board meeting, and Robert Boyd Bell, a journalist who was working, he was kind of like, he's done a lot of things in his life, and he, at the time, was working for us. He literally threw Once Were Warriors across the room to me and said, "Well, if you're going to make a film, make this." And I read it, and that night, and I was electrified. I mean, it was a film that spoke to me about my own family who were loved to drink, loved to sing, and so we set about getting the rights. And this is, as you said, we knew nothing. I mean, went to Karen Soach, who's the lawyer, and we're going looking for option and purchase agreements to kind of option this book. Alan Duff had another offer, so I had to go down and pitch to kind of get the rights. And so it began. And the really cool story about this whole thing is, I really loved Alan's book. Ross Jennings, who was a drama producer, was working at Communicado at the time. And he said, "Oh, this is a unique voice of an author, and you must get Alan Duff to write the screenplay." Well, he wrote the screenplay, and frankly, it was not good. Which Lee recognised immediately and brought on another writer, giving me the great job of telling Alan Duff that he couldn't write the screenplay to his own book. But how we came together is Lee was really hugely admired for a series of commercials that he'd been doing with fern leaf butter, and they had a kind of they had a quality, certainly in terms of the characterisation, that made them really famous at the time. And so Lee was the obvious choice. Of course he said no.
Yeah, I did actually. Yeah. I said no a couple of times, though.
Yeah, but eventually we got together with Riwhiu, and a thing that I discovered about Lee is Lee's got the most really great sense of story, and he's a very talented filmmaker. So over a weekend, at Communicado, we put up all this brown butcher paper around the wall, and mapped out what became the Once Were Warriors film. And Lee was determined it would be a female-driven story because all the other characters in the book were a bit obnoxious in some ways. And the woman is the one who kind of finds redemption. So that was the beginning of what became a kind of a relationship. When you talk about producer-director relationships, I'm really old-fashioned in the sense that I believe producer's job is to enable a director. It has to be a relationship based on huge respect for what the director does. So it's the job of the producer to make it happen for a director, and to, as much as possible, to give them the tools that they require.
So, Lee, this was your first feature film. Robin, this was your feature as a first feature as a producer. And actually, I noted that you were the only producer actually on the film. So, both of you together, how did you figure out?
No, there were other producers.
Oh, there were? Okay.
Yeah, they didn't trust me to make a film, so they put the Film Commission put another producer, Murray Newey, on, and I was ably helped with, Janet MacGyver was so-called at the time production manager, but truly we, it's never just a producer, it's like a team.
So Lee, in terms of that, I mean, what were your expectations as you were going into a film? You'd obviously worked on other films.
In truth, on reflection, none of us had ever made a film before. Neither the producer, nor the director, nor the writer. We were going into uncharted territory, and there was no manual. What I knew was that now I'd learned some craft as a commercials director. So what I knew I was good at, was telling a story in short form, in very short form, which is commercial driven. A number of shots telling a 30-second or 60-second story. But my worry was that at 90 minutes or 100 minutes or whatever, that I would tell the story in 35 minutes flat, and there'd be, where would it go? I didn't trust myself to do long form storytelling. So, but you have to have the confidence of something. So I kind of, well, look, I can do this. But the short history of it was that, we got together and I said, look, words to this effect, not, you don't know what you're doing, I don't know what you're doing, none of us know what we're doing, but we'll make it together and we'll make this thing work. But I think in some ways that was the liberating factor on it. There was no, you know, when Peter made Lord of the Rings, they brought in, some heavy hitters to oversee his version of Lord of the Rings, which is now legendary and all that stuff. But there was a certain thing imposed upon him, which actually may have been a good thing for Peter, because we know what Peter's style was before Lord of the Rings. But then a certain production style was brought in to embrace the enormity of the thing that he was making, and then he conformed to that, and then he became his own person within that. What we were doing was we had no money, no anything, but we had a book which was achieving legendary status and was a really powerful book. And Robin wanted to make a film out of it. I wanted to make a film out of it once I brought my head around to doing it, because I did have major misgivings about the story. I'm a great lover of social realism in cinema around the world, Italian, British, wherever it comes from. And I thought there was a chance for us to make something in the Ken Loach vision of that. But when I looked at it, I thought, this is a nightmare. It's a nightmare story, whichever way you go. And I was very aware that, as much as I love Ken Loach, an audience doesn't love Ken Loach or even know who he is. And that would leave the film at the mercy of small, unknown film festivals where it might get some kudos. So my approach going into it was mercifully with a background of filmmaking that then became commercial filmmaking. I knew how to dress the thing up. I said, what we need to do is dress this book up into a thing that people will want to go and see. We have to actually, and I engaged friends of mine, because we had no money, friends of mine in Saatchi's, Wellington, who shall remain nameless, but did huge amounts of work on this for us in many areas. Specifically gave us particular help in certain how to market thrash, do certain things, and how to take this film that no one would want to see and make people want to see it. So it was a very, very collective effort. And when I decided to switch it from this male perspective, look, you've all read the book, or you may not have. In the book, it's a first-person narrative. It's an insular narrative. You're inside one guy's head, and he loves to smack people over and beat them up. That's effectively the story. The women are ancillary, his sons and children are ancillary, it's all in his head. If you make a film about that character, nobody's really going to want to see it, other than those that want to see Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. And I knew that this is one of the reasons I didn't actually want to make it into a film. When I read it, I said, you can't translate this stuff. So I said, we had this conversation, I said, look, in truth, the people that suffer the most are the women in the story. If you swing the viewpoint around to a female perspective, the guy is still going to loom large all over it. He's going to drive a truck right through the story. It's impossible to ignore him. And that was where we parted company with Alan, because while it was Alan's story, and Alan had written the first draft of the screenplay, I knew Alan was never going to be able to go where we needed it to go, to write it from a woman's perspective. So that's when ran around. I said, look, I'm going to find somebody who can write this, and they need to be a woman. It has to have a woman's touch on this. And when I came across Riwhiu, who ran across me one day in Wellington and said, give me a job, we're from Ngāti Porou, give me a job, you need to give me a job. I said, okay, I've got a job for you. She was writing plays in Wellington at Takirua, and I said, if you can get your head around this, I introduced her to Robin, we got together, we put this thing together, and I said, look, the three of us don't know what we're doing, but we'll do it together. And I said, you write the character and dialogue for this thing, I'll write the cinematic and the visual components to it. I'll keep you on track and where the story has to go, and the three of us will actually get this thing made together. And that's kind of the history of it. But it was made out of it was made because none of us really had done anything for it, and we were. I hesitate to say this, but there were virtually no egos at work. I mean, I could have imposed my ego on it because I was the director, but I had to let all that go. And Riwhiu and I had some legendary battles over it, and it was fantastic. She fought her corner, I fought mine, Robin fought hers, I'd fight my corner. We'd fight these three-way corners, and we'd have these great battles. But because none of us had any experience, we all ended up in the service of the story in the end, and that's what it became. And looking back on it now, which is in a way why I'm working with Robin again, is that Robin produced that film really well, as a novice producer, like got the elements together and made them work, and I said, look, I need this and I need this. You know, I said, how much money have we got? We got this much money, X money. We've got to make up for this money. So, you know, then Janet and I and the others, we'd all get this and fit this round square peg into this round hole and try and make it work. But we knew that we could do that because we'd all made films and commercials before. We knew what it was like to be on the lower edge of and making things for no money in New Zealand. And that film was made for 2.3 New Zealand, 2.3 million.
No, less.
Less or whatever. That's what you told me it was.
2.2. No, I did not.
Well, whatever it was made for bugger all money. But
2.2.
And but there were, I think sometimes, and it's a salutary lesson on all those, and in some ways it's happened on this again as well, even though the budget's bigger and times have changed and inflation and this and inflation that when you make a film with very limited resources, it pushes you into areas that make you become more creative about what you have to do. There's no point bleating on about what you can't have. I want 45 trucks and 400 troops and 7,000 sheep. You know, it's pointless if you can't afford it. You've got to find more innovative ways of doing it. And one of the things I'll mention here, because otherwise I'll forget it, is the opening shot of Once Were Warriors is a perfect example of not having the money to achieve one thing and coming to another. And the ultimate finale really is actually a better idea than the one we came up with in the first place. The opening shot for Warriors was supposed to be a real ghetto, probably South Auckland, and a real farm. And there was going to be a giant crane shot that was going to go from a bucolic landscape and drift across this road and go into a South Auckland ghetto. Well, it doesn't exist. You can't find it and you can't make it. We didn't have digital help, couldn't split the frame, couldn't do all these things. So we searched high and low to try and find a thing which gave us a bucolic, classic New Zealand landscape, and that would then show off a landscape of the urban poor, if you will. And when we couldn't do that for love nor money, and it was impossible to do, I sat down and said, well, how is it can be done another way? Well, the other way to do it was a purely commercial-driven idea. It's a visual idea, which you all know because you've seen the film. It's the idea of the bucolic landscape, but then jammed onto a billboard, which is even more, perhaps more incisive in its own way. Because then what you do is you can put the billboard in the ghetto or wherever you want it to be. And I've told this many times, but it's one of those things you do because you've got nowhere else to go. You have to go somewhere else, and you have to put your thinking cap on and do these things all the time. We're very good at doing that. And when you've got a lot of money, and I've worked in America where you have a lot more cash than sense, people throw money at these problems rather than common sense at them. I've worked in environments where writers have been replaced at the drop of a hat merely because they wrote a bad page. And I say, this is ridiculous, you just wrote a bad page. You know, but no, they fire them and you get another writer, and I said, this is madness, you know. You got to start up with another writer, and it happens like that. But, you know, and Warriors was a game changer for a lot of people and for the industry, and it changed a lot of things, but it changed things for Robin and I inexorably. We all thought it was, honestly, to this day, I'll always say this, and it's the truth, no one knew it was going to be a success. I thought it would be a failure, quietly disappear in some corner of the world at some film festival, because its subject matter was too hard, too difficult to embrace. And New Zealanders would not go and see it. Why would they? Because they didn't go and see our own movies anyway, and they're certainly not going to go and see this one. Right. But then it all changed, and I think it's because we took big risks and we did things in a different way.
The thing that helped us, ironically, was in terms of that cohesion as a unit, was the fact that everyone was opposed to us making it.
That's true. Yeah.
From the get-go, sort of we had
even Māori were opposed to us.
Everyone. Apart from our great ally Don Selwyn.
Yeah.
Sort of who in fact was the person who challenged me to make Once Warriors. So, ironically, that kind of we had a sense of being like us against them, and. Because the funding bodies were so incredibly scared of doing something which was politically incorrect. Classically, the Film Commission, this kind of, you probably heard the story, but we're thinking, how can we convince the Film Commission that this is okay to make? Well, if we get a Maori who's dealing with people that are represented in Once for Warriors, and they come along and they say, look, this is okay to tell a story about sort of people like this, then maybe they'll think it's okay. So Rana Waitai was the person that I approached. He had made himself really famous because he had got gangs to take patches off when they came into sort of town, Gisborne. And he was brilliant. I've always credited him with actually taking the Film Commission over the line, because he stood up in front of the Film Commission and said, because he knew that world, he said, we will never grow as a nation if you do not make this film. And he was so powerful and had such a powerful presence in the room.
Yeah, but he turned up in his police commander's
that
uniform
they all
too,
kind of
fantastic,
quaked.
with his hat on.
You could
and
see
he walked into the Film Commission and stood there and took his hat off and put it under his arm and stood there. And it just sort of like floored the lot of them. And then he made this speech, and he went, "My God, you can't turn this guy down."
But we had to come up with cunning plans like this and strategy all the way through. It wasn't just. And so when Lee talks about his friends at Saatchi's, here's the moment, I so remember it. We had a distributor, John Maynard, and he was in Australia.
Well, he was kind of forced upon us. I know John, I love him, but he was forced upon us by the Film Commission.
But
Otherwise
anyway,
we
were sitting. He was on the phone in Australia, and we were sitting, sort of in a kind of like flying fish, I think it was, and we go, okay, so what's your marketing plan? And he goes, the Film Commission will pay for 4 prints, and I'll release 4 prints and we'll see how it goes. And Lee and I just looked at one another, and because, all of our commercial instincts were going, oh, fuck. So we then, go down to Saatchi and Saatchi, and Lee's mates go, right, let's do an advertising campaign for no money.
Well, basically, I presented them. We had been working together a lot. The creative division in Wellington and Saatchi's, and I had done a lot of commercials together. And I went to them and I said, look, you need to help me out. I've got a film, we've got no advertising budget, we can't do anything, but what would your strategy be with a film, to get a film into the public consciousness with no money? That was my brief to them, which they loved, of course, because they were already highly paid and getting briefs all over the place. They said, wow, and great, a whole new brief, a brief where we've got no money, we've got no strategy whatsoever, this is fantastic. But they were great, and they were pivotal to it, because they said the key to this is radio. They said, and I said, what? And they said, yes. They said, you make the film, you show it. If it's you invite, you get every radio personality who's running a radio talkback show from every provincial centre, Whakatane, Gisborne, Napier, Invercargill. You invite them all, you fly them up or invite them all to a screening in Auckland. You show them the film. You say, go back and talk about this film on your radio station. Tell them if you hate it, talk about it. If you love it, talk about it. We don't want to affect your opinion. Just show it to them. If the film's any good, they'll do the work, which is exactly what happened. And it was a fantastic strategy. They came in and they went back and they talked it up in the regions which were critical, because the strategy in New Zealand was always as Robin said, cut 4 prints for the 4 major cities and then roll those around the region so that people get to see the film some 6 months later after in a dodgy print which is all scratched and marked and fucked up. And I was adamantly opposed to that, but nobody's going to support my desire to run 21 or 23 prints to hit Invercargill, New Plymouth, all at the same time. But I knew that the strategy, if this thing worked, it was going to break. If it was going to break, it would break all at once, and then people would want to see it all at the same time. And these guys strategized this thing, and they were absolutely spot on. The radio became the way that it talked it up, and once it became a talking point, we struck these prints, and then these prints had to go to the region. Everyone had to see it all at the same time. It became a kind of a thing, but it was a marvellous strategy that was just created from nothing, and the guys loved it because they weren't being paid. They were doing it pro bono on their lunch hours and everything. But that's what we were all doing. So we were calling in a lot of favours to do things like that.
Yeah, like also showing it in a multiplex for the first time. Because up until that point in time, New Zealand's films had been shown in sort of the little art house cinemas, which there were still a few. So, I mean, again, all of these things, were things that we strategized together. So there were things which, I go, okay, well, we need to get into a multiplex. how do we get into a multiplex? Well, my husband at the time, Ivano, who's died a couple of years ago, he was building these big cinemas for Four Cinemas. So he knew Peter Francis. And so, okay, I'll get Peter Francis to come to a screening down in Wellington, and then he can't refuse to put this in the multiplex. So we, every step of the way, we fought to sort of get the best for...
Just on this point, because I mean, you guys were obviously a really tight team in the way that you started to work together. You obviously developed the trust that you needed in each other to sort of go down the path together and push and shove and get all of these things made. But there must have been challenges along the way, just in terms of that relationship as you were sort of going down it. What did you find, Robin, as the producer, in terms of the biggest challenge of working on a feature with a director? What sort of comes to mind?
Well, I guess it was the biggest thing was just really finding my feet, sort of in terms of, because we hadn't done this before, so it's really trying to find. And there were a couple of things where we clashed in terms of script. There's kind of a diatribe about the ills of drink, which I hated because I thought that it was it was too political, and we clashed over that. But most of the time, what I can remember is us doing our separate jobs. So, and learning how to do those separate jobs. I had lots of experience of working with directors and directing myself in terms of, so I knew well enough to because I think that there are distinct areas. The producer's got to do their job well, and and in terms of the way it works, they've always got to give the director support. Going back to what I said earlier. So that became clearer and clearer, and I think that's become clearer and clearer the more I've done it. Right. It's kind of like actually getting better at supporting the director, and that is not just about money. It's about people that the director needs, supporting choices that the director wants, fighting for the director if people are opposing something. Understanding what they want, and really, kind of delivering it.
Great. So I'm actually going to move on now from Once Were Warriors, and it was fantastic. Many of my questions already got answered, so I feel pretty good about moving on. So, Lee, I mean, Once Were Warriors was a major success. It sort of catapulted you onto the international scene. The next film that you did was really big, a big American film, taking you out of this New Zealand environment, which was everybody chips in and makes a great film, and all of a sudden you're in this huge Hollywood machine, and you've got all of these people running around, all of these producers. What were the observations in terms of you as the director and how you interacted with producers in that environment?
Well, it was easier than you might think, and once again, it's because of the commercial environment I grew up in. I've heard all the horror stories about working in the American environment, and the people that don't do well in it are the Europeans, the French, the Germans, the Danes, and all the others that get, they're brilliant directors, and they get sucked into the Hollywood machine, and they get spat out, and they're terrified, and they never go back, and they go back and make films in their own country. A lot of that's to do with language, but actually it's a lot to do with the culture, and indeed, we're no stranger to this ourselves, but in Europe, especially in Europe, the auteur theory holds huge sway right across the length and breadth of Europe, right through Russia, especially in France, as we all know, and to a large extent in Britain. And all of that got embraced, as we know, in the late 60s and early 70s into the American environment. Now, when I went to the United States, I went in there as one of these... America's very good at sucking in talent from all over the world and utilising it to its own purposes, and then, making you rich and be rich beyond your wildest dreams, but as long as you do what they want you to do, so to speak. You've all heard these horror stories or whatever. But the thing that saved my bacon, really, going into this environment was really, I spoke good English, and that was a help. That's why British directors do very well in the American environment. But it was the commercial environment that saved my bacon, because when you've dealt with clients and agency, if you understand anything about the commercial environment, you're not just dealing with, in a film environment, you're dealing with your collaborators, writer, producer, director, actors, and all the stuff. But in a commercial environment, you're dealing with literally two bosses. There's the agency that's hired you in the first place, or whatever form of agency exists these days. I'm out of it, so I don't know too much about it, but I'm sure it still exists. There's a creative element inside there, but then there's also the people that are paying their bills, which is the client who owns the product which is being sold. These are very hard taskmasters. They want something, and they want a brilliant result for money well spent, and who can blame them? It's a business. And when you've dealt with these people, and for many years as I had, I've always found myself in the situation as I could not explain myself clearly to the agency and the client as to what I was doing. If I could not articulate why I was doing what I was doing, then I'd failed in my duties as a communicator and as a director. So I learned very quickly that one of the things you have to do, either in pitching an idea or selling a particular aspect of an idea when you're making a film, something, is to go straight to the heart of the matter and put people at ease about what the hell their concerns are. And a lot of film directors need to learn that. Coming out of film schools, wherever one comes from, it doesn't matter how fabulous you think you are or how fabulous you think your ideas are. You have to sell that idea or your thoughts and your ideas to someone else that's got to finance it. Whether it be an individual, whether it be someone who means well, whether it be a dodgy financier, or whether it be an American film studio, which is essentially a bank. And they want to know how and why and what your vision, so-called vision, or those things are. And you need to articulate those things very clearly. I found that going straight in, I was able to choose a project because I had a hot art house film. All the actors want to jump in and work with you, which is great, but it doesn't solve the fundamental problem that the first film I made in America cost $35 million in 1975, and that was middle of the road budget, even at those days. But 35 million US, come on, we made Warriors for, now I know, less than 2 million. And you're jumping in with large budgets and all the playthings in the world that you want to do, but there's still, the same problems still come up. They want to know how you're going to do it, are you going to complete it on time, are you going to fuck it up, are you going to be, they've all heard these stories about mad, out of control directors doing and all that. So if you can articulate very clearly to those people and put their minds at ease, you can actually get whatever you want. And I found that was one of the biggest assets I ever had in going into America. So not only that, it gave me confidence to be able to deal with them. You'd sit in rooms with very high-powered executives and even more high-powered studio heads who, they're dealing with $1 billion a year back in the 90s, and they've got to make 10 to 15 major movies a year, and they're looking to see whether you're going to succeed or fail on making a film for them. And so it's all about that, putting people at ease and communicating things, but always, and I know there's been, some of my peer group end up in highly combative situations with producers, studio heads, financiers and that, because the relationship breaks down on a fundamental level. And I'm, in a strange way, I won't talk too much about it, but I'm going through that at the moment with Europe. In Europe, with a film that I've sort of been plugging away at over 3 years, and it's still unfinished. And it's essentially I look at what Robin and I have achieved in the last 6 months. We've prepped, shot and edited a film in 6 months flat, and it's nearly going to be complete by the time I leave at the end of the month. It won't be complete, but and that's it's a way to make it. It's not gone by clockwork, but we know what we're doing. We trust each other to do that. I've got to go back to Europe to finish off a film which is sort of in chaos, but I have both a moral and film director's responsibility to bring that in properly the way I see it, against all odds. But I'm battling an individual whose primary consideration is to make money, not to make films, and then he's a strange egotistical character that he'll pretend to listen to your ideas but won't actually listen to them. And we've all met these characters. You know who they are, and you go and you don't want to work with these people. You really don't want to work with these people. You want to work with people you trust, because you're going to go to war, and you're going into battle with people. You need to know who's on your right and who's on your left, and you need to be able to trust them implicitly. You can have skirmishes with your co-workers, with your writer, with your producer and that, but you've got to be on the same page. You can have mighty battles if you want to, but it's essentially what I found, like working with Robin in the past and on this, is that, you know, she'll watch my back everywhere, all across this, you know, this project. And even I've had some flare-ups with her, which I feel bad about. But they pass away in the night, and they go in the morning winds, because they're nothing concerning the project. The project is paramount, and that's what everyone in this room should realise. That I figured out a long time ago, that it's the story and the film and the project that matters. Not you, the director, not the writer, not the actor, not anyone. Everybody is in service to that project. It's beholden to all of us to bring it in properly and as the best job that we can possibly do. So the American environment for me was exactly like that, and I was very comfortable with it, and I became very able to work within it because of those reasons. But I'd say, once again, commercials were my saving grace in that, on that level.
So Robin, I mean, Lee had gone offshore and gone on to the career that we all know about. I mean, you've stayed here, you've continued to develop new talent and start new projects. And what other learnings have you taken in terms of the relationship between the producer and director from that?
Well, the first thing that happened was we went to Toronto, with the Warriors, and it was, Lee was, because Once Warriors was a hot, you know, art house film. People were actually waiting outside his room and waiting in the corridors, these kind of powerful agents, sort of desperate to sign Lee up. And I thought, wow, this is an amazing thing to do. It's actually, if I could, you know, try to do this again, like to actually make it possible to kind of choose projects, help directors have an opportunity to get an offshore project made. And so for a moment in time, that became sort of the thing I tried to do. So with Gregor Nicholas, he'd done a film. In fact, Gregor was a friend of Lee's. He had done a film which wasn't forwarding his career. So we did Broken English, which did get him an offer, with DreamWorks, or an American studio, which he didn't actually take up, but it was like, so from then on, I tried to make films with directors who had the opportunity to go elsewhere. So, but it was always driven by, this is a curious thing, it's driven by, you know, someone brings something to me that I feel I can help them make, or finding something. Like with The Rain, it was Christine bringing the book Rain, and think, oh my God, it's going to be the most, you know, like difficult adaptation ever, or finding a book, or something that was Body Basher, just loving that book. For a long time, and never dreaming that I'd actually, work with Lee again. Because from my point of view, Lee was off, he had his offshore career. We didn't actually communicate with one another, because I was thinking, this is my place, this is what I'm doing, Lee's doing this. But then I got the opportunity to develop Body Basher, ironically, because Nick Beachman and Honi Koka had done they had exhausted all of their possibilities of the route they were going down. And Witi Yamara's agent rang me and went, would you like to take this on? And of course I went, oh my God, would I ever? And the first thing I said to Witi Yamara was, oh my God, if we could get Lee interested in this, directing it, and we get John Colley as the writer, it would be terrific. And so it wasn't a kind of, it happened very organically. It's not something like I didn't count on it.
Yeah.
I don't count on, I'd love to work with Lee again, but it's not something that I count on, because it will be very, very driven by a project that, because again, the producer's job is to find things that people like Lee want to do.
So Lee, what made you decide to come back, from offshore? Well, I know that you sort of live here. But...
I actually been here for a long time.
Yeah.
People don't know that I live on a farm, or I did live on a farm down on the east coast for a bit. But I was flitting around the world making films. So I was using this place as an aircraft carrier and flying off to. This was my base because I was getting tired of living in Los Angeles and living out of suitcases. So I moved back to New Zealand. And then I would start, but nobody knew I was here. I was never in Auckland. I was always down there, but I was making films in the world. But I way back in the 90s, I had a sort of plan, which in a bizarre fashion is kind of coming to fruition. When I left, and I made Once Were Warriors because I wanted to get a film out of my system. I thought it would fail, and I'd go back to making commercials, and everyone would never hear about me again. The complete opposite happened. I gave up commercials and took up making films. But when I went into the American environment, I went into it because I wanted to get into the largest and most dangerous and unforgiving environment in the world and see if I could make it in that. Well, I could make it. I made some successes and made some failures. But I didn't want to stay there. The only reason I went into the American environment in many ways was to bat in the big leagues, to play in the, you're going to come from a provincial team, you may as well go for the big team whether you win or lose. You've got to test yourself against all odds. But then I'd always had this idea that I'd go out there and I'd give it 10 years and then I'd move into another environment. And I started to tinker with that in Europe. I wanted to move into a hybrid environment between America and New Zealand, which is New Zealand's independent filmmaking and America is major. I never and haven't wanted to do an independent film in America. I figure that's for American independent film directors and not for me. I want to do high-end or large-scale projects in America. So then I thought there's a hybrid ground somewhere in Europe where there's more capital and a different environment, entirely different, French, German, British, Spanish, Italian, and I was quite allured by that. So I've been messing around with that with some success, and I'm making another one at the moment. But you couldn't have made both these films I've made in Europe out of New Zealand; they just wouldn't have worked that way. But I always intended to come back to New Zealand and then nail down at least 2 or 3, hopefully, quintessential New Zealand movies. This being one of them. It wasn't part of this particular story. Wasn't part of the plan, but I wanted to do something like this, and then a very personal driven story which I want to write myself as a writer-director, which I haven't done before, and I want to do that one, and it's a quintessential New Zealand story, and then one more, and then that'll be it. That's game over for me. But that's it. I've done that. But who knows what will happen? But that's in a strange way. It's coming to pass through circumstance rather than by design.
So Robin, it's probably a good time to catch up on where the Patriarch's at. What's the experience been like? How have you
We need
found
more money. We're going to pass the hat around.
How have you found it working with Lee together again? And
well, it's it's same and different. I mean, basically, we're now both have got lots more experience, but Lee's got this extraordinary ability to absolutely focus on sort of what he wants, sort of out of a scene. Some directors sort of have to shoot a lot of material in order to find sort of in cutting what they want out of a scene. And Lee goes in with a really, really, it feels like a razor sharp sense of how the scene is working, what he wants. And so, is often sort of the DOP, the first AD, whereas people will offer things up to the director. Oh, you need this, you might need a bit more coverage here. Oh, you might need... And they go, no, because he's got this kind of really clear sense of focus and what he wants. And so that's the same. Mm. I think what is different is that we are now both more experienced. I guess that's different. What is different also is that the degree of complexity in terms of raising money now is different. I mean, we started off with one funding plan and sort of we had 2 million from one investor, and we didn't want that investor anymore, so we had to have another funding plan. So it's been a roller coaster from our point of view of kind of the funding side of things. So yeah, but yeah, I mean that's same but different.
Let me talk about it'd be an interesting little aside on this. Both Once Were Warriors and this film have been made under very similar conditions, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I've been a great believer. A lot of other directors don't work this way. Because I was an AD, and it's the bane of my life because I was an AD. But being an AD puts you in the logistics camp. It means you know how a film is made from every aspect. You know what everybody's job is, you know what everybody's doing. But when you get films like Warriors, budget nil, and this film, budget near to nil, but because it's a period film, so we had to cram a 39-day schedule into 35. Well, me and the first got together because I know what his job is and he knows what mine is. And both of these films were made in a fashion I can only call shoot the day schedule, which is there's no room. We've only got 35 days to shoot it. You can't run over schedule. You can't run into the next day. It's not possible because the next day will suffer because of it. So you have to narrow the story down and choose exactly what you have to shoot and shoot it on that day. Now, I haven't made every other film is not made this way, but these ones have both been made this way, and it's turned out to be very successful. Both of these films, who can talk about the success of this one, but it's been shot on time and on budget and exactly how we wanted to do it. But I remember saying to Luke Robinson, my AD, I said, the only way we'll get through this is by this fashion, that we've got a 10-hour day, we've got this amount of material to shoot, and we've got to get through it. If the weather or the trucks don't turn up or something happens to us, we've got to get through it. If I've had 30 shots planned, I'll shoot them in 5, and if I can't shoot them in 5, I'll shoot them in 1 shot, which we ended up doing. But it's a process I would urge a lot of you to look at. It's not based on logistics, but it does get your film made, and you do get the film made, you do get all the material shot. But if you don't do it that way, you're going to get screwed. It's all very well to hang out there for the fabulous crane shot at dawn when the sun's poking over the horizon, and you have to wait 3 hours for it, but that's not going to get you your film made. That's going to get sliced up in the editing room, and you'll wonder why you spent 3 hours waiting for that when you should have shot it in 15 minutes. And I know it's a brutal thing to say, but a film like this, I knew going into it, is the only way to make it, and we approached it on that level. And so what Robin was perhaps talking about, to some way, I'm very decisive about the things I want. I don't shoot everything in a master shot and lots of coverage after that. I shoot the stuff that's I edit it in my head and shoot the stuff that's in my head, but if it doesn't work out that way, I change track very fast and get through the day's work. And this shoot was full of it. 50% of this shoot was firing down to the finishing line in the last hour and just getting the material we needed just before we had to wrap, because it wasn't only, the budget was so tight on this that we couldn't afford any overtime. I think we shot a couple of hours overtime over the whole movie.
Yeah.
Because it was extremely
crew overtime.
Extremely
crew
tight.
Overtime.
Yeah, but you have to be
masses of other overtime.
You have to be cognizant of all these things if you're going to go into into this territory. And I mean, I'm pretty good at it, but a lot of emerging filmmakers may not be, and it's a skill and something that I can teach to other filmmakers. I'm very happy to do that. But it's my style of filmmaking. It's not everybody's. There's other people like Vincent and others who make films in a completely different fashion. Not everyone's the same, but sometimes these things will come up against you in this limited budget environment that we work in. And if you want to get the best possible result from what you've got, you've really got to approach these films like that. There's no point in playing this strange vision of a director who's in charge and yelling out all these commands and thinking it's something about, and I enjoy it. It's coming out of one environment into this is really, it's like retraining again. Going, oh yeah, I remember how to do this. Bang, like that. It's actually really fulfilling. I really enjoy it. I wouldn't want to make every film like that because it's actually quite punishing. You do lose things along the way. There's a little creative edge you lose along the way where you set your mind on something truly beautiful and creative, and you just don't get to realise it because the schedule doesn't allow you to do so. But
Right. So we'll sort of wrap up shortly and open it up for questions, but I've kind of pulled out a few things that you've sort of mentioned. I mean, respect was really key. I guess trust was really key. Understanding the jobs that you've got and doing them to the best of your ability, and an absolute dedication to the project. Are there any other sort of key things that you might like to impart to everybody here about this, you know, about projects, about that relationship between the director and producer that we may not have touched on yet?
Well, I think that what Lee touches on in terms of like getting it made should be the same for a producer, because often producers give up when it becomes too hard. And sort of like I find, you know, I mean, people get so far down the funding track and they think it's just too hard, or they complain about, you know, sort of obstacles that are put in their way. I think you should expect obstacles, and you should you know, have enjoy them, really. I mean, just as, you know, Lee talks about enjoying the challenge of sort of the hardship of a lower budget. It's kind of like it is. You choose to be in this business. You choose to go down this path. You've got to bloody well make it work and deliver. It's kind of like, so I think that's kind of a key.
Lee, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would say as a director, what I've learned over the years is that you really, the relationship between a producer and director is so pivotal. I'm always bleating on about all the extra producer credits on a film, you know, because I can't stand them. I like to work with one producer and make a film with one producer credit and one director credit. It's not possible anymore because you have to share credits on where for lots of reasons. But whoever is producing the film, the person, you know, male or female, who's your partner, there's usually only one person. There's not usually several. Even though there's associate co-producers and other producing credits on them, you all work with those people. You make that film with one other person, much like you do with your DP or your other costume designers. You're not working with lots of costume designers and lots of DPs. It's a recipe for disaster. So you really have to lock in with one person and make that film. And it's good to have battles. They're very healthy because I find, look, I'm as egotistical as the next person. I'm the first person to know that when I have to sometimes give myself a reality check and go, look, you're just being a bastard here, and you're just being an obstinate director prick. And you have to stop and listen and look at the bigger picture, go back, see what the problem is that the producer's faced with. Look, we just can't afford this, we can't afford that. Okay, look, we can't afford that, so let's try it this way. The more you listen to, if you can soon determine whether your producer is feathering their own nest, egotistically running off at the mouth and not doing the job for the film. If you've got a good producer and you probably have climbed into a project together, then you need to support each other all the way through it. You have to be as cognizant as a director of the limitations of the budget that you've got as the producer is as cognizant of what you have to give you as much of the tools as you need to make that project without destroying each other. And the battles are usually healthy because we'll come out at the end of this great mates, and I know there'll be no outstanding issues between us because we're too long in the tooth for it, and we know each other through thick and thin. Even though it's been 20 years we've made a picture, even the making of this has been, I know what Robin's up against and how she got the funding together, which has been legendary, really. I don't know how she got the funding together with this, but if I knew anyone was going to get it together, it would be Robin. And so I'm very in admiration of that, and I'll always work towards whatever we have to do to fit that budget and not run over budget or do anything like that. But you have to. There's a very tenuous relationship. The producer-director relationship is more tenuous than anything. The DP comes and goes, and so does the costume designer and the editor and all that. They're your collaborators. But the people that are going to be through all aspects of it are going to be the two of you, and you have to be really, really, really in tight with each other and trust each other, and it's as simple as that. And I've had situations where it's not like that, and it's a fucking nightmare.
Well, we can move on to questions now. That was a good and succinct and sharp summary. So I'll open it up to the floor. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Lee. I was just wondering, you were talking before about needing to make your day.
Yeah.
Say you're having a time where you've got an actor who's having a challenging day, struggling to get the performance.
Yeah.
Do you just never have that happen to you, or do you drop shots and prioritise the performance over?
No, you have to recognise where the problem lies in the performance itself. Is it the actor who can't come up with it? Is it the actual lines that they're saying which are rubbish and you should get rid of all the dialogue and say nothing at all? You have to identify very quickly what the problem is. And that's taken me years to learn, because when I started out I thought the script was sacrosanct and was absolutely everything that was written is absolutely brilliant no matter who wrote it, but it's not. The actor is the front line in your movie, and they are the people up there 40 foot wide and 20 feet high on the screen. And it doesn't matter. I've been in many situations where some of the best actors in the world and some of those who are not are faced with a situation and say, what am I, these words are gobbledygook, or this scene doesn't make sense. I've become very good now at spotting very quickly if the actors don't like a scene, there's a reason, the scene's in trouble. You can do, there's many options. You can analyse instantly, talk to the actor about what the problem is. Instead, say, I don't, why am I saying these things? This person wouldn't do this. Okay, let's not do that. Let's go and stand at the bar instead. Throw the rest of it out. Let's not even go into this room. Let's walk outside and stand by that car. You find what is the character, not the actor. What is the character's role in this scene? What are they supposed to be doing in this scene? You talk it through with the actor, and you find what the primary objective is, what they need to get across in that scene, and then make that work. And that can work in a room with a white wall, or it can work in a scene with 1,000 extras. If they're having trouble, it's best that you listen to them. If you can get past the fact that they've broken up with their boyfriend or girlfriend and that it's a personal issue, and if they're pretty highly strung and they're usually their radar's going off, but it's pretty good radar, and it's best to be listened to and trying to resolve in one way or another. Even if you don't actually come up with a solution and you make them feel more comfortable about the situation that they're in, then they come up with, it's fantastic. I've been in scenes where both of us, myself and the actors, don't understand the scene we're in. So why are we saying this? Well, I don't know, but the studio wants, we've got to do it. It's in the script. So we can't not shoot it. And I said, well, let's do the best. And in fact, some of the best situations I've been in whereas I've been in trouble personally, and the actors have to save my bacon. They love that. They rub their hands together. They go, oh my God, the director's in big trouble. Come on, here we go. And they get in there, and they're just amazing at what they do. They can take a line which is rubbish and turn it into absolute brilliance. Because I said, look, just try saying it this way and that way. And they're amazing at what they can do. Okay. And Nancy just did this on this movie. I said, I can't believe it. Nancy Brunning. I was like, I'm not sure if it's going to work. And she said, well, let me say it anyway. And she tried it 3 different ways. I go, God, she made it work. Like, it's fantastic. She made me look good. You made me look fantastic. But it's true. If you have a problem with them, there's a reason for it. And it's usually, it'll be the scene, the script, and it'll be your problem, not usually theirs. Because actors, remember, all they do is go home at night. They don't just go home at night and say the next day's lines in front of the mirror. They live the part. They live the part more than you do. You're living every part in the movie and everybody else's role, all the technicians' parts. But they're living their one partner. They know it better than anyone. Once they take it on, they know exactly what it is better than you do. And so, they're best to be listened to. And there's always a way out of it, without conflict too.
Anything else?
Actually, slightly following.
Next.
Yeah, Lee, I was just going to say, in the examples you guys have given, this has been this very rich, creatively collaborative relationship. Can you talk a little bit about, in your experience, when you work with your main producer, where there isn't that creative collaboration, who have you turned to, or
Well, I've just been in one of those, and I'm in one right in the middle of one at the moment. I'm working for a financier who's a producer. He's a producer by name only, but he's a financier who makes movies, so he calls himself a producer. And what I've found is that we put a film together from scratch, like literally wrote it. He wanted to make a film about a certain character, a subject, and I said, I'll do that, but I don't want to do. It's a historical character, 400 years ago, 16th century. And I said, look, you know, these subjects don't interest me. I think they're boring, kings and queens and all these people. And he said, well, can you find a way to make it work? So I got my writer and we found a way to make it work. I said, I'll make it work if I can do this story. He agreed, and we went along this road of writing multiple drafts of a screenplay from scratch, which is quite rare, you know, from a central idea to make a screenplay up. And I got quite enamored with this, and so did my writer. But I got through 7 drafts with one writer, and then I wore him out. I got another writer, and I got through 7 drafts with him and wore him out. So I got through 14 drafts, only to find out that my producer wasn't actually reading these drafts. He was giving them to his sales team. You know, and our sales team is the worst people in the world, because all they want to do is they want action in the first 5 minutes, and they want a big name, marquee name, you know, to sell the picture, and that's what their interests are. We've got to sell this picture. So he was feeding the script, rather than read it himself, which I thought he was doing, he was actually feeding it to his sales team and people in his office to get feedback. So he'd read 1 in 5 drafts. He probably read 3 drafts out of the 14 that I wrote. I was absolutely livid at the end, because what I was getting back was feedback from the office girl, the sales team, and he was dressing them up as his own comments. And I couldn't understand why the thing was running off the rails. They were stupid comments, and they were fatuous, and so we ended up at loggerheads, and in the end I dug in and I said, look, I didn't say this to him, but I said to everyone around him, I said, I have to save this film from this guy. I have to save him from himself, because he actually doesn't know what he wants, and I have to make this film, you know, I have to make a film and not embarrass myself, and not just slavishly make this film that he wants to keep changing these things and aspects of it because what he thinks will sell well in Bulgaria or something like that. So I've had to sort of force my agenda down his throat. I said, I'm making this film, this draft of the screenplay, because I still maintain that the best draft of the screenplay that we wrote, he rejected, because his sales team rejected it, and he wouldn't go back to it. And it was a dynamite draft. It was really good, but we're never going to have that draft. So we're going to have a lesser picture than we should have. And I'm fighting for the second best screenplay, and I've said to him, I'm making that, no matter what you think of it, that's the film I'm making. Now you can cut the budget and do whatever you like, but I'm not veering off that path. So it's been, and all these experiences are good for you when you're in total combat with an egregious producer who actually is not even a producer at all. You know, these are good for you because they battle harden you up for the next time that this stuff comes around. They do. I've said this many times. I mean, it's astonishing some of the wars and conflicts you go into, and you come out of it. You know, I made a film with an actor who I was in total conflict with, absolute conflict with, and I'd never come across anything like it before. And I asked my producer, I said, I want to know what to do in this situation. And he said, I've seen this 1,000 times, there's no problem with it. He said, just turn up, do your job, be professional, leave him behind, don't worry about him. Tell him to stand on his marks, say his lines, say good morning, say goodbye, be polite, go at it. And that's what I did, and it really worked, because he's got nowhere else to go. He can abuse you and call you a fuckwit and do whatever, but he ends up looking foolish. You don't, you just do your job and you get through it. But these things come at you. And they gird your loins for every production that comes in the future. It's all good stuff. The terrible stuff that happens in this industry is all good fodder makes you stronger as a filmmaker, actor, anything, you know, really.